All right, let's see. Can you guys hear me out there? All right.
Yes.
Good evening. I want to be respectful of folks' time. I kind of hope a little bit bigger turnout, but thank you all for coming tonight. We may get some more stragglers as we're going along, but my name is Kaylee Haga. I am the Chief of Staff and Executive Director of Communications for Eastern Carver County Schools. Welcome to our community conversation around shared responsibility, social media, and school safety. So we are joined tonight by a distinguished panel who I will introduce in a moment. I want to also point out in the crowd we have Matt Haga, who is our District Director of Technology, Safety, and Security, and Lieutenant Lance Pierce with the Carver County Sheriff's Office. We also have our Executive Director of Community Education, Sue Harberts, our Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, and Assessment, Dr. Kristen Goodman, and our Executive Director of Specialized Services, Dr. Laura Kundry-Kyle. They will be helping out. We're going to have some time for questions at the end. They have index cards and pens, and we'll be passing those out and collecting those. As you have questions, they will be grabbing those, and we will be taking those and reading those to the panel after their presentation is concluded. And I see in the back our board chair, Jen Stone, so thank you for being here tonight, Chair Stone. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panel tonight. We have immediately to my left, Dr. Erin Rathke, our ECCS Superintendent. Manaen, our ECCS Assistant Superintendent. One of our fantastic school resource officers representing the Carver County Sheriff's Office, Deputy Ethan Larson, who works at Chaska High School. And then Officer Hunter Panning, our school resource officer who works out of the IAA and for our middle schools, and is with the Chaska Police Department. So this is our panel tonight. As I said, we're talking about social media and school safety, and I want to give a little bit of context before we start off. As many of you are aware, we've seen an uptick nationally, at the state level and locally, around social media threats, and we've seen them impact schools in terms of creating climates around fear. They have disrupted school days, they've canceled schools, and really it's been something that both administrators and local law enforcement have had to spend a lot of time dealing with. And we know as parents and community members, it's raised a great deal of concern for you as well. We want our kids to be safe. We want to feel like we're sending them to safe places. And we want them to be able to focus on learning when they're in those places. So I'm just going to read a sample of some of the headlines I pulled just in a quick Google search. School shootings continue to skyrocket on social media after Appalachian shooting. Arrests made as law enforcement and officials investigate school threats across central Alabama. We can't take any school threats lightly. Hope school threats close schools, strain districts and police departments. Mankato area public schools say social media threat, report of a gun at middle school fabricated. Escambia school is on alert to a social media threat against several schools. 13-year-old Ontario student arrested at online cross-country school threats. Middletown 14-year-old charged with East Hampton school bomb threats. Joliet police made third arrest, a 12-year-old, in connection to social media threats directed at schools. A New York Times reported over 700 students have been arrested or charged across 45 states for threats made against schools and students at schools. And KSTP reported earlier this year that there have been 14 reported threats against schools compared to 3 last year at the same time. We know that these ebb and flow, and typically we see a spike and an increase after this major event, actual events of school. And we also know that there are increased tensions every time this happens, and real fear, whether the threat is real or not, that impacts parents, students, staff, and it creates an increased burden on our administrators and our law enforcement partners. And just today, we learned of another hoax that is impacting communities across the country, where text messages are circulating that are causing racial harm to Black Americans, and another series of text messages circulating with sexist and misogynistic memes that are impacting women and young teenagers. So this is something that we are working very hard as a district to respond to. We've been in classrooms, we've had lessons, you're going to hear more about that tonight. And we know that parents are also looking for resources and ways to support their teenagers, their young students, in staying safe and keeping their communities safe. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Rathke to begin our presentation.
I probably should have got the microphone ready. I couldn't reach it. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here with us tonight, and of course, thank you to the people that are online. We are streaming to ensure that we can reach as many of our community members as possible. This is a really important topic to our district because, like Kaylee said, it has been really intense for us the first handful of weeks, and of course, my superintendent partners and districts across the state and the nation are experiencing an increase of social media threats. And I want to just say, one of the things that you hear the school district say is that safety is our #1 priority. And those are just words to people until they start either having a personal experience, or they're worried about their child going to school, or a rumor spreads from the school that their child goes to, or their best friend goes to, or their community goes to. And then it becomes words that people want to see things happen and they want to know the action that's going to be taken. I first and foremost want to say that I wish these are not things that we had to spend our time on, but it is critical that we are focused on this with our students. One of the things we really wrestled with this year so far in the first handful of weeks, as we've had a couple incidences, is really ensuring that we are maintaining the obligation that we have, which is to serve and educate our students. No matter what happens, no matter what incident, no matter what it's around, our obligation to kids is to educate them. Even when kids make mistakes, we are responsible to be teachers in every moment. And so this has been a really critical part of conversation that we've had as district leaders is when these things happen, have we explicitly told our students what we expect of them on social media, in our spaces, so that they know how we are going to respond and react. We also have an increased anxiety of students who don't know and are concerned when they hear rumors. And so we want to ensure that our students know how we're going to respond as well. You know, one of the gifts and the difficult parts about being in education is that our students' brains are not developed yet. And so as their brain is developing, they are learning how to make decisions, and sometimes our kids make impulsive decisions, and they are responsible on social media 24/7. And we wanted to make sure that even though they weren't in our four walls, in classrooms, in our buildings, that they understood that their interactions on social media 24/7 can have an impact back into the buildings. I want to just say to you that one of the things we talk to our students about is the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. Impact versus intent. And that is that brain development piece where students will say to us, I was just kidding. I didn't mean it. And that is probably true almost 99% of the time. It wasn't meant to create a stir. It wasn't meant for 25 other people to see. And they were not able to make that decision and know that it was going to make a bigger impact on their school, their peers, and our communities. And so we talk to students about perceived and real threats are the same, and we as a district have to respond to them in the same way. One of the things that you've seen us do over the last handful of years, and then specifically this year, is we've increased our cell phone policy. Part of that is to slow down the social media bell to bell as we have our students in our spaces, but wanting them to really understand that 24/7 still impacts our buildings. We have also increased our education around digital citizenship, wanting our students to understand the implications and the impacts of what can happen on social media. So what I just want to end my part in saying is that we always are battling, challenging, thinking about, expressing, figuring out how to be great, transparent communicators to our communities when these things happen. And we have a limited amount of information sometimes that we can share. Investigations sometimes are ongoing and people want to have information, and that creates a feeling of mistrust, especially when there's unknown and there's a threat or a perceived threat on the other side. And tonight is really about us sharing processes, the way that we're thinking about it, because we want to continue to build trust with our community and want people to know that we have an obligation to educate our students. and that there is work happening behind the scenes, and it is often things that people do not see. And so that's a great segue for the next portion, and I'm going to pass it out to the Assistant Superintendent to share a little bit about that.
Thank you, Dr. Rathke. As Dr. Rathke shared, our number one priority, even before providing students with an excellent education, is keeping our students safe and feeling a sense of engagement and welcome at school. And so we take our threats really, really seriously whenever we hear about them. When we are made aware of threats, there's 3 priorities we have through that process. When we're made aware, the first is to protect student safety, both in the immediate and then all the way through and after that process. The second is to preserve students' rights. Students, both making threats and students on the back end of those, come to our schools with a number of rights that inform how we engage in our process. And then lastly, we're schools, we're educators. And so working with students, there are a myriad of reasons why these things happen. And we believe that behavior is communication. And so working with students when these moments happen to help them learn from them in a way that allow them to not have to repeat these types of situations is really paramount to us as well. So what I'd like to walk you through is what happens from the minute we are made aware of a threat, possible threat, alleged threat, all the way through to completion where we're acting on what we might believe would be an appropriate next step. And that can look a whole variety of ways. I'll talk to that now. So the first thing that happens, we have a number of ways that students and or staff can report threats to school officials. Often it comes from a student will make contact with the dean, an assistant principal, a principal, or a teacher. A staff member in the building will then report it here to the district. We also have throughout our schools posters with QR codes where students and staff can anonymously report. They say they may not feel comfortable putting their own name to it. They can report what they believe to be true. Sometimes we hear directly from families. There's also, if you go to our website, a link right on the main webpage where student, staff, family, community members can indicate a possible threat, and those route right to us. As soon as we're made aware, the first thing we do is secure immediate safety. Depending on the nature of the threat, that can look like a lot of different things. Sometimes that means separating students, sometimes that means ensuring students are where they're supposed to be, sometimes that means making immediate contact home, but our first step is to secure immediate safety to the best that we're able. The second part then is to make contact with the appropriate family members to make them aware, whether you're the person who's made the threat or potential receivers of that threat, as relevant and appropriate. And then we immediately assemble our threat assessment team. That threat assessment team is made up of a variety of people, some folks who are consistent through every single threat assessment we hold, some that rotate in and out based on the specifics and the specific nature of that both individual or individuals as well as the situation. So consistent people are always myself, Assistant Superintendent. We typically always involve our Director of Safety, Security, and Technology as a partner. School administrators, always the principal, sometimes the assistant principal, sometimes the dean, and then relevant school staff. Sometimes that can mean the counselor or the social worker. Sometimes that can mean the homeroom teacher or teachers in our secondary schools. Sometimes that might mean the student's multilingual teacher or special education teacher or other support special education staff. And often, depending on the nature of the threat, we'll also partner up with our incredible SRO partners who have been unbelievable supports to us, and they'll be sharing a little bit more about what they do later on in tonight's presentation. All the way through the process, as soon as we're alerted, I also alert Dr. Rathke, so she's able to coordinate with any other relevant stakeholders, cabinet members, etc. And then when it comes to the actual threat assessment itself, as I mentioned, we assemble a pretty big team. I gave you an example of some number of folks that are on there. And the reason we bring such a comprehensive team together is our intention when we meet for that threat assessment is to analyze the situation from as many relevant thoughtful, professional viewpoints as possible to understand the nature of the threat, the likelihood, severity, possible impacts, and then come up with an appropriate plan to act based on what we determine. So that actual threat assessment is made up of 3 parts. The first part is building background, both on the situation as well as the student and or students involved. So we assemble a wide range of information, right? What do we know about the student's history? What are the academic pieces of information? I'm going to give you some examples. It's about a 20-page document with a whole variety of things. We won't go through all of it tonight, but I am going to give you some examples of the types of things and types of information we review. Academic records, behavior records, enrollment history. Does the student have an IEP? What's been their history with where they've been? What other things may have come up in their past? Are there other mental health challenges or concerns that we might know about the student? What do we know about the other relationships that the student may have that may inform our conversation? And then what happened in this exact moment? We want to make sure that everyone around that table, that large group of professionals that I mentioned, has the same information in terms of what's the facts that we are aware of before, through, and after the situation, so we can then move into the analysis portion of that threat assessment. Threat assessments typically run at least an hour. Sometimes they'll run multiple hours, depending on the nature of the situation. Once we build common background and understanding, we move into the analysis section of the threat assessment. I'd say there's kind of 2 parts to that analysis piece. The first is we run through a set of questions that we ask ourselves every single time to gauge the realistic likelihood. Is this a realistic threat? Or is this the thing someone said when they were feeling really upset? This is where we start to analyze motivation. We start to analyze what type of access does the student have to, what's their realistic ability to carry out this threat. We start to analyze what's the specificity of the threat. Was this a general statement made in a moment of anger, impulsivity, or have I actually written out a plan of something that may transpire, right? We start to analyze what was the level of impact up to this moment, and what might the continued impact be of that situation. Once we work through, like I mentioned, there's a large number, dozens of questions that we ask ourselves and work through and continue to build a profile of this specific situation and the specific individuals. What's the likelihood of this happening again? What else do we, we'll move into a kind of a threat level determination, right? And that determination we just place along the spectrum that helps us inform where we're going to go next in terms of our action steps. And I would say that spectrum runs along we don't believe this is a credible threat. We don't believe it was made with any real forethought, planning, or intent, and or we don't believe there's a high likelihood of this happening or happening again. Or we believe the impact is really low. It doesn't mean that we don't still respond, but we're just trying to determine where does this threat live as we start to determine next steps. Because no matter what the threat is, there's always next steps, whether credible or not, whether intended or not, whether low impact or high impact. There's always next steps for us. All the way up to a more significant level, right? A higher level of risk, where we might say, it looks like there's some actually pretty specific forethought that's gone into this, or we, based on the information we have a high degree of confidence or belief that this may transpire if left unchecked, or could happen again, or the potential impact of it is so great, even if we don't know that it's highly credible, still merits a pretty significant response. Again, that's made in collaboration with our SROs, who I mentioned have been really fantastic partners, and then a wide variety of people. And we will sit at that table for as long as it takes to get alignment with each other. Having now done many of these in my time as a SUP, I've been incredibly impressed by both the thoughtfulness that this team, as well as the rest of that threat assessment team, brings to this work. There's a deep commitment to student safety for all of our students in the impacted area. there's also a deep commitment in that process to ensuring that we are equipping the student, no matter next steps, to not have to make those same decisions, to not get to the same place. So after we've done that analysis work and landed on here's where we think this is, we then move into what's our action plan? And that can look a whole variety of ways. Sometimes a student may say something, heat of the moment, I lost a dodgeball, I'm upset, and I blurt out a threat to another student who is on the other team. We take that seriously. We're going to run a full analysis with that full table of people. We're going to collect all that background information. We're going to have that extended discussion to determine the level of threat. At the end of it, we might say, we believe this was a statement made in the heat of the moment between two competitors. There's no intent, there's no means. We don't believe this is going to happen. And so our next steps are to communicate, work with student, restore those relationships, set appropriate boundaries. There may be some punitive consequences that follow. Different versus we believe the student has targeted a specific student or group of students. We believe there's imminent danger at play, and I'm going to give you the more extreme examples. We're moving towards immediate referral for expulsion, right? And some other things that may take place on the legal side of things. Obviously, the communication accordingly is going to look different. Those action plans are going to look different. But what's true in every single action plan is what needs to happen from the adults, from a programmatic perspective, from a supervision perspective, to ensure continued student safety. What needs to happen with that student in terms of how their day looks, additional supports, right? Sometimes it's, we're going to connect the student with therapeutic supports. We're going to connect the student with a counselor. We're going to make sure that there's some other things happening to both, you know what, my mom and dad have been fighting a lot at home, and I'm just not feeling like I have attention, and so I said a thing that I didn't mean, but I don't know how else to get attention. Our response in terms of how we support that student and make sure they have what they need is going to be very different from saying, I just keep getting into fights on the bus. So you get my point. Accordingly then, we develop an action plan, a communication plan, and then at the end of that threat assessment, no matter where we land based on where we land with that student, we always set a follow-up. What does a 30-day, depends on the nature. Is this a 2-week follow-up? Is this a 30-day follow-up? Is this a 90-day follow-up to ensure that the system we put in place is working for the student and the rest of the school community? So as I mentioned, our SROs have been incredible partners in this process, and I will say, having now worked with both of the gentlemen to my left on a number of situations, their responsiveness, thoughtfulness at the table, and work to support all of our students proactively and reactively has been incredibly commendable. I feel very fortunate to work alongside them. I'm going to pass the microphone to them so they can share a little bit more about their work as school resource officers here at ECCS.
Hello everybody, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the proactiveness that we do in our schools. So what I do in my school at Chaska High School to be proactive in making sure that our school is safe, along with our students and staff, is I'm out in the hallways and trying to build those relationships with all students, all staff members, and continue that throughout the day. I'm a firm believer if I gain those relationships with the students and staffs, they can have that rapport with me to then come forward if there is something going on at home, if there is something going on anywhere else. And then once, if I were to get something that's social media related or just anything in general, that's where the proactiveness also comes into where if they tell me what's going on, I can then react with the proper resources that they would need. Another example of that is hanging out in the lunchroom with kids. It gives those kids in a social setting to come up to me and just get to know who I am. So that's just a couple examples of what I do as SRO at our high school, being proactive. And as Nate said, we do a really good job partnering with this district and making sure that all of our students and staff are safe.
Hi everyone, I'm Hunter. I work for the Chaska Police Department. Ethan works for the Sheriff's Office. That being said, it basically feels like we work for the same agency because of how much we collaborate. And then we have another SRO named Trent, who's not here tonight, but he's primarily at the other Chaska High School. So I spend most of my time at the Integrated Arts Academy, which is a little bit smaller, a little bit different programming for high school kids, and then also all 3 of our middle schools in Chaska. Middle school is probably the hardest age, and where I find the most impact with my presence in the relationships I build with those students. As Ethan said, most of our job, very little of our job is law enforcement. I would say probably 10% of our job is law enforcement in the schools. And quite frankly out in the community too, but we're in the buildings to build relationships with teachers, students, staff members, to get to know folks so we notice when something is off, or we notice when a student comes to school tomorrow and they're acting much differently than they did yesterday, or than they usually do. It's a very valuable thing to be able to see these kids every day and then kind of compare it to when they're having a hard day to see what we can do to help them. Because so little of our job is law enforcement, I'd say most of our work in this type of environment is also support and really getting to the root of the problem. I would consider this type of instance a symptom of a much larger problem that needs to be investigated and treated. I don't think these are standalone, siloed incidents. There's so much background, so many other things that have gone on that have got this student to this point where they do this, that we can work with them on. So that being said, I use the criminal justice system sparingly. However, it is a tool that we can use. And when we refer kids to the courts, the juvenile justice system is primarily rehabilitative focused. So even if they do get charged with a crime, the goal of the juvenile justice system is to rebuild that good decision making, good behavior, and how to be a more positive piece to society. So that being said, as Ethan said, we have a proactive and a reactive side. Most of our job, most of our day is spent proactive. When this stuff happens, we take it seriously. We have the same type of law enforcement authority as the other cops that patrol. We have the same tools available to us. We have the same people available to us. So we know when we need to enact those different steps. As do Dr. Rathke and Nate. I trust them completely on when they determine, if they determine that this is a big deal, then I trust them completely and we follow through. I have not been in a situation where we have very different viewpoints, which is, I guess, kudos to our ability to work together in these threat assessments to really determine the foundation of the problem. So Nate was talking very highly of us, but I could say the same thing about them. And I'm grateful to have that relationship. I'm from Chaska, I grew up here. This is a place I call home. I don't want anyone to get hurt in any of the schools I work in. So I take this job very seriously. Also knowing that I can have a huge impact just being a positive role model and encountering these students when they're feeling low or down or bullied or what have you, to work with them on building resiliency and healthy avenues to relieve their stress or anger. So that kind of wraps up my portion.
I want to be able to compliment both of these police officers that are in our schools, and our school resource officer program is really critical in Eastern Carver County, and I think our staff, our community, and our students have a really high value of them being in the building with them, and it is critical that they are creating relationships with our students. And it is so important, even our most marginalized students, our communities, or our students who feel like they have not had good interactions with police officers, or they are afraid that they are going to have poor interactions with police officers. These two continue to interrupt that and be out and about in spaces for kids to feel safe and to interact with them. And that is really the point of a school resource officer program. We just have the very best in our buildings, and I know that they seriously know our students, and when they give us a recommendation and it is time for the police to take over, that is our responsibility as a district to know when it is time to hand it over to law enforcement. And so there is times when that does happen, but we have for the most part really found that partnership has been critical for us, and so we're just so grateful to the Sheriff's Department, to Chaska PD for being great partners in our district.
So one of the questions that we frequently get, is when do you communicate? What is the line? Where is the line? I'm a parent in the district. When I started this job in 2019, I had those same questions. There were things that I thought should have been communicated, questions I had. And so one of the first things that I did was I sat down with a few parents and said, let's talk about this together. Because there are times when, well, if you communicated about every fight in the hallway, if you communicated about everything, I don't know about you guys, but I get a lot of emails from buildings and teachers and things like that. You'd be overwhelmed. So in partnership with these parents, we developed a communications protocol that really talks about sort of the low, the medium, and the high. And what is classroom to parents, what is teacher to parents, what is teacher to classroom, what is principal to school building, what is district-wide. It's on the community relations page, and communications is not a binary. There is no if this, then absolutely that. There are circumstances that change, but one of the things that I think is really important is that folks understand that a fight between two kids in the hallway is not going to necessarily end up with a communication outside of the parents of those kids involved. But if something happens in the classroom, if there is something that impacts the safety and well-being of kids in a classroom, then the parents of those kids are going to know. We have made that commitment. If something happens during lunchtime, during 6th grade lunch, something is said, a threat is made, we're going to communicate with 6th grade families. If something happens in the building, if rumors fly, kids talk. Cell phone ban helps a little bit with that because there's a little bit of control over text flying between students. And we know that folks are chattering or parents start to call. We will absolutely get a communication out. And so we try to balance because we don't want to unnecessarily alarm folks, but we also want to err on the side of proactively communicating and being as transparent as we possibly can, because we don't want anyone to get unnecessarily hurt or unnecessarily alarmed by a rumor or somebody coming home and saying, Mom, this happened. I don't want to be that parent. I've been that parent. So we do have very clear protocols. We try very hard to get them right. I can't promise that we get it right 100% of the time. But I think we've got a pretty good track record on it. And so always looking for feedback on the process. And when we feel like something rises to a district issue, we communicate about it. And sometimes it's on the bubble. If it's on the bubble, my tendency is to communicate it to everybody because I think it's important. Especially when it comes to safety, especially in an environment where there's so much going on and there's so much coming at us that it feels like we feel better knowing we've addressed this, whether it's a hoax or not. Here's what we're doing, here's how we're keeping our folks safe. So I just wanted to put that out there, that we do have a protocol. It's public facing, community relations department on the district website. You're free to take a look. I'm always happy to have a conversation around how and when we communicate, but I think we've gotten pretty good at it. I feel pretty strongly about it. So with that, I wanted to take it back to Dr. Rathke to talk about ways in which we can continue to partner.
One of the things that we always want to talk about is why and when we communicate, and I'm so grateful Kaylee is such a good, thoughtful partner when it comes time to make that decision. And Oftentimes, schools get put in positions where they can't communicate anything. Or there is limited information that they can communicate, and that is really hard. It's hard as a leader, it's hard as a community member, it's hard as a parent, and I want to always acknowledge that we always err on the side of being as transparent as possible, and sometimes there are things that limit us in being able to do so, and want to acknowledge the challenge of that. This last part that we're talking about, we called it call to action. And it is an opportunity for us to share a little bit about why this community conversation and why being out in partners across our city and our organizations, making sure that families and community members, students, parents, caregivers would hear us talking about this, is that there is no way that the schools can do this alone. Oftentimes, many of these things land in the school, but it is really going to take all of us to be able to support our students as they navigate their brain development, as they navigate the impact of social media, as they navigate their peer groups and their peer pressures, as they do that in platforms that mostly none of us have ever experienced. I think that's one thing that I continue to be reminded of is, as an educator, I have experienced Snapchat and Instagram and Discord or whatever they are on right now. Most of us are probably still on Facebook. But as a child, that was not my experience. I am parenting through something, I am leading through something that I did not experience as a child. And the relentlessness of social media is intoxicating. It is for our kids. It is detrimental to our kids. It is challenging for our kids. They never get a breath from their peer group. When I think about going home after school when I was a kid, the only way they could call me was on my landline. And my landline was answered by my father. And that gave me 12 hours of breath from the next time I was with my peer group. Our kids are with their peer groups, can be with their peer groups 24/7. And so that is a lot of pressure and navigation that we ask our kids to do with underdeveloped brains that are not ready to think that through 10 steps. They will make impulsive decisions. And so my call to action is for us to have grace for our kids, as they will make mistakes. And it will cause conversations, and we will have our students come home and tell us stories, and we'll want to get alarmed because there are babies. And we have to have grace for kids who make mistakes. And I always want our kids to know that they are not defined with the last mistake that they made, and that if I was held accountable to every mistake I made at my middle school when I was 13 or 12 or 16, I would not be sitting here. So that is first and foremost, is the love and grace for our kids. And I just believe in every one of our students, and I do not think we have bad kids. I think they make hard and difficult decisions that they do not understand the ramifications of. So that is first and foremost. I think the second thing as a call to action, and just for us all to understand, is our kids all have a right to be educated. They come with rights. And the Fair Pupil Act is something that we are obligated to follow. And sometimes in the midst of fear on behalf of our own children, we want kids to be expelled or to leave, get rid of them. We have no tolerance. And our students do have rights inside of our buildings. And so that is always a delicate balance of grace and love for kids, for expectations of families, and we're always walking such a difficult and fine line as we serve each and every student, even in a student's mistake. Another call to action we have is that what I really wanted you to hear tonight is we are obligated and required and are grateful for the opportunity to wrap around our students. These services, these things that we talk about, this is not just a moment in time where they made a mistake or there was a threat, perceived or real. Most of the threat assessments that we've experienced this year have been perceived, not real. And in that moment, we're not just talking about their incident. What I want you to hear through that threat assessment is we are talking about students for who they are, what they're experiencing, what was before, what was during, and then what will we do after. Because this is a moment in time for them, but this is our opportunity to wrap all the way around them and help them walk through this. Whoever was harmed, to walk through it, for our parents to help them walk through it in our community if it has a larger impact in that way. So this is an opportunity for us to wrap all the way around our students. I think we are all hands on deck. And I know many of you are reading The Anxious Generation, or you're hearing about that. Certainly social media is just another, conversation is increasing from a parent perspective, from adult perspective, and we have to talk to our students about the obligation, the impact that social media has. I think Kaylee has taught me so much. She actually scares me sometimes because she knows way too much about social media, but the footprint and the footprint that can be left in the trail of our students is serious. We have to be so thoughtful that we're talking to our kids about these short-term decisions have long-term impact. We have seen where kids have lost scholarships, they've lost opportunities, they've lost jobs because there is a footprint digitally, and we have to talk to our students about that, our children about that. We also have to talk to our kids that it is okay to report. And we are so grateful. Our kids believing in our community is how we all stay safe, because they usually know before we do. And so how do we help our students have the strength and the courage to report? That's why we have an anonymous reporting tool. They've got to give us enough for us to respond to it, but we always dig in, try to figure it out. Who knows? Did anybody know this kid? Can you make a guess? But we also want these people to have relationships with our students so they know that it's safe and important to report. There is nothing too small to report, and we will always take it seriously. So I'm asking for all of us and our kids too to have all hands on deck to keep us all safe is really important. And then again, I think just our own individual dinner time conversations where we're having conversations with our own children. I know that I'm talking to my kids about it all the time, and they probably get tired of hearing it, but I've seen way too many decisions that students have made that impact them forever. And impact them in their school community. And there's nothing worse than feeling like you don't feel safe and aren't able to be in a space that you really feel committed to. So it is really a call to action for all of us, and it is so important because it is on behalf of our children.
Thank you, Dr. Rathke. Thank you, panel. So we have some time for questions. I've got district staff in the back there who've got note cards and pens. If folks have questions and want to write them down. I do want to say we're not going to answer any questions up here on stage about specific situations because we want to respect privacy. Happy to have some conversations offline individually afterwards if folks have those. And we're not going to talk about any of the specifics of our security protocols just because that's not something we do. We've got to keep our staff and our students in our building safe. I have a few questions for you guys, so we'll wait to see if there's any that come up out of the audience. I know that one of the questions that we always get is what did you do, and a lot of times we can't, because of privacy issues, answer that question. Assistant Superintendent Manaen, you gave some examples, but can you provide kind of an example of the range of discipline that we see? And I'm thinking not just about the punitive, but some of the, like what would an example of some relearning and some those kinds of things be in some of these situations?
Absolutely. So there are kind of two sides to that. Like you use the word range of discipline, but range of outcomes for students, and I would classify them into two different categories. One being like a reteach and restore. So if some aspect of this was a function of a student missing a skill, conflict management, anger management, social isolation, things like that. We are going to provide supports and resources in the form of reteach, connection to a social worker, a counselor, or other therapeutic supports. It may be a anger management support, something like that. And then there's sometimes often with that a restore, right? If intended or not, if you caused harm to another individual or group of individuals, it may be appropriate to do a follow-up with that group to say, like, fix it, right? Fix the harm, restore the harm through conversation or other action that may make sense in that moment. In terms of that other punitive consequence side, that can look a whole lot of different ways. Sometimes that means students lose access to say it's, you know what, I don't get to play football anymore. I can play soccer, but I don't get to do football, right? At recess, because that's where this keeps happening. Or it could be, I've been suspended for a day or days. You asked for the range, and so the back at top end of that range is referral for expulsion. Right? In which case the student is either going to go online or look for a different schooling opportunity.
And correct me, just checking, I kept myself hot, I wasn't sure. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have our student disciplinary handbook online, so if parents want to go and look and see more specifics, we have that online on all of our school websites, so parents can go and look through the behavioral handbook, those kinds of things.
You can find on the school website. You could also reach out to your child's principal, and they can provide it to you as well.
And responses are similar, even if it's not something that's on social media, correct? Like if it's something on a bathroom wall or something said to somebody else.
Yep, if it impacts students in their school day and compromises safety, we engage it. We've kind of implied it throughout this conversation, but if you look at that student handbook, you'll see a progressive approach to, based on what's happened, severity, impact, in terms of what types of actions we may take in response to that, and those are equally progressive in their response.
Dr. Rathke, I don't know which one of you two want to take this one, but we saw a lot of activity early in the school year. It felt like we saw a real uptick in threats. How has the cell phone ban impacted that?
I can start. We can take the team this one. So one of the things that I have just had the great privilege of doing over the last handful of weeks is spending a lot of time with our students. And I've been just listening to students talk about what's really important to them right now, which is part of the reason we're having this community conversation. So I'm gonna answer this question, but I know that there was a question from a community member about the expansion of the topic of threat on social media. And so I do want to just say, curious why the topic of online exploitation crimes, including the fastest growing crime affecting youth, sextortion, was left out of the discussion. So I want to acknowledge that we did have a very targeted community conversation today. I know that this is a really high value of some people in our community. This was generated out of just this first conversation, and we are certainly excited about the potential of a series of having community conversations across organizations, but we're trying this. One was because our students talked to us about this in particular, and so the opportunity to lift student voice and take action on behalf of our students who have told us that they want to know what we do when these things happen has brought us to this. So that's number one, so as I answer that. Our kids all have different perspectives about the cell phone policy. Here is what we have heard overwhelmingly. Our parents appreciate it. They wanted it. It has been overwhelmingly positive. That is wonderful. And I was also concerned of teachers enacting that because it is at the feet of our teachers, and I want to acknowledge that. I feel like we have heard good feedback on behalf of our teachers where we have heard things like they feel like students are being a little more social, that they're chatting more, they're engaged differently, and our students are struggling with it. Some of them, if you ask them pressingly, they will tell you that they're glad we're doing it. And then there are moments in time where they want to have their cell phones and they feel limited by not being able to do that. So I want to say that we have a wide range of feeling around our cell phone policy. Here's what we do know is that I always talk about social media is like a room in your house that has a lock on it that you can't get into. But everybody's in the room but you. And so much is happening. Meet here, do this. I'll see you here. Let me poke at you this way. Let me poke at you this way. And all of the adults in the space aren't in the room, but all the kids are in the room and it's locked. That is a really hard to get ahead of. And so when we talk about being proactive in response to things, it's hard to when the room's locked. So when I say that, what I do believe our cell phone policy has done is it has slowed some of that down. And when I asked students about it, and I was just at Shan High School this week, you were there with me listening, they were like, I really don't like it, but I see your point. And I do believe it has slowed some of the bullying, chatting, poking, threatening down for us during the day. But that is why it has been so critical for us to, again, explicitly teach our students that they are responsible 24/7, and 24/7 impacts our buildings, even if they don't mean it to. Is there anything you would add?
Two things I would say with the fine point. The cell phone ban has, I would say, significantly slowed down the number of incidents happening during the day with student-to-student drama. And in the last 10 to 20 years, the amount of fights that transpired during the school day that, as school administrators worked to figure out why did this come to be, were a function of online back and forth between kids, has had a dramatic uptick. And so mitigating some of that during the day has been great. The other thing I would add is the other side of social media is how easy it is to make really bombastic statements or really threatening statements in an anonymous way. And this is not directly connected to the cell phone ban, but I would say has added a dimension to how we're thinking about school safety and responding to school threats, and where I would say we work really closely. I didn't mention this in the school-facing consequences, but I do think it's important to share. This is a part where we work really closely with our school resource officer partners to leverage their full resources as well as ours to run some of those down.
I'm super curious what our law enforcement partners have observed. Has it helped difference a little bit since you're mostly in the high schools, Hunter's in the middle schools. I don't know. Have you seen any difference?
Yeah, from my perspective in Chaska High School, I have seen a huge difference. It's impacted these kids to be a lot more social. In the classroom, when I walk through the hallways, I've noticed there is a lot of teachers engaging with their students, and then the students engaging back with those teachers. I've even noticed at lunchtime, even in passing time, there's less kids even on their phones, even when they're allowed to be on their phones. I've seen a lot more kids actually engaging with their friends in person instead of just through social media or any other type of way on their devices.
Well, hang on to the mic. This next one's for you guys. Can you talk about when we do need to engage with law enforcement, when there's a threat that comes in off social media that you guys are called in to help investigate with? How do you work across jurisdictions, be that local, with state agency partners, national partners? What does that look like? How do you guys work together?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing here is that it happens and happens a lot. With technology, we're able to collaborate nationwide very easily with other law enforcement agencies. And additionally, the rise of these information fusion centers nationwide, basically in a criminal intelligence hub, they alert us to a lot of things that Snapchat or Instagram are flagging to them. So just this year we had an incident where a threat was made over Snapchat. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's Fusion Center flagged that Snapchat for whatever specific word was said. The Fusion Center alerted our patrol officers, because it was at midnight essentially, and by 5 a.m. we had the person identified and we were taking appropriate action. So we work with each other statewide, nationally, very frequently. And because this is unfortunately such a widespread issue, we know that it's extremely important to identify quickly if this is something that started in Nebraska and now it's here. You'd be surprised at how quick that happens. Or if it started here and we need to stop it before it goes to Florida. So yeah, I would say it happens and it happens frequently, and from my perspective, it's very effective, the communication we have nationally.
I did want to come back to this question. I'll just mention it one more time. The question was, I'm curious about the topic of online exploitation crimes, including the fastest growing crime affecting youth, sextortion, was left out of the discussion. As Dr. Rathke mentioned, that was not the initial focus and impetus for this conversation, but I do want to just speak really briefly about how we do respond when these moments come up. The first thing I would say, having the power of a cell phone and access to the world, and in many ways the world having access to our students in their hands, is something everyone is still adjusting to. And really wonderful students, we have really wonderful students in ECCS, can sometimes get caught up in things totally and completely by accident or unawares or naive or wander into things online that end in sextortion type of situation. When those moments happen, two things always occur. The first is we make immediate contact with the family to ensure that they're aware of the situation, depending on the nature of what it is, other appropriate adults. And then, given that it really crosses over into the illegal activity, we work really closely with our SROs, especially if we're not sure where is this coming from, what's the source of it. As I mentioned, some of those things can be really hard to track down, but we always do our diligence to do our best to figure out and then put a stop to it immediately in collaboration with the parents. It's one of those, again, that I would just stamp one more time how important it is for families to stay in communication with their students around online activity and online use. Having seen it both as a principal and now as an assistant superintendent, the ways and how quickly students can, unsupervised and not on purpose, end up in situations that are really well beyond their developmental level.
This is kind of a good follow-up to that conversation. And I know this can be really frustrating sometimes to navigate. How does the district handle threats made against another student outside of school, i.e. online, off school grounds, outside of school hours?
That's why we've been talking about 24/7, and we always, if it brings something back into the building where we are responsible to respond, and that is a place where students, if their interaction is going to create a disruption to the educational environment, we need to respond. And so we follow our process, whether it's from midnight or if it happened at 2 o'clock. So I'm going to pass it off to the assistant superintendent because that is then immediately where he steps in to support our building leaders.
So we run the same process depending on the nature of what it is and where it happened. If it's from an ECCS student to an ECCS student or an ECCS student to a different place, we engage in that threat assessment process. If and when that moment is someone external to our district making a threat to a ECCS student or a group of ECCS students, is where, regardless of other situations, we immediately reach out to Ethan, Hunter, or Trent, and then they'll come in and start working with us to determine where is this coming from, how do we respond. It's been sometimes as quick as suddenly, we'll say, hey, this is happening. An hour later, I'll hear back, yep, we had an officer at the location, has made immediate contact, and here's what we learned about the situation. So, again, working really closely with our partners here to run those down and then respond. Is there more either of you want to say about that?
And correct me if I'm wrong, that's not just like a school district thing. That is, the nexus to school is established case law, right? That is an obligation that the school has, not just our choice to pursue and engage in investigating kids because of stuff they're doing outside of school hours.
If it creates a disruption to students' participation in school, including I don't feel safe to come to school, I'm worried about my safety at school, I'm worried about my safety leaving or arriving at school, we have a legal obligation to respond.
Thanks, that's good clarification. How many threat situations do you have to manage per week on average?
Well, that's really hard to quantify. More than I prefer, but I think a lot of that, there's two things, right? At the start of the year, right, we're going to see some of that as students readjust to being in school and there's new relationships and new things happening. I will also just echo what Executive Director Heide said earlier this evening, which is we do see an uptick following significant school safety events, and that's what we believe is happening right now.
It's hard to quantify for me as well. I guess there is really no good answer. Just like any other part of law enforcement, it's very unpredictable. So as Nate said, too many. One is too many in my world, but there really is no good answer to how many per week.
Sometimes one of the things, again, hard to quantify, but one of the things that's really critical is the threat assessment is not to say it's something bad, like now we've got to do a threat assessment. The opportunity to circle around as collaborative partners and talk about such situations and students allows us to ensure that we are making sure our students are safe and that we're addressing the situation. I've actually found our threat assessments, when it has even turned out to be low, or hey, I just want to call you and let you know this happened. I don't think we need to do a threat assessment. I know it'll come up low. The act of talking about a student in a situation intentionally puts us in a place of care and response. And so it's not like a quantitative thing of like it's bad. It's a time that we pull together people to think through and on behalf of kids, our staff, our students, in our community.
I would add one other thing. We have a district of over 9,000 students, 13 schools, plus 2 additional sites. In my experience, a far and away majority of these moments, even when we're convening a large team of people and spending time on these threat assessments, I would say the tone and tenor and feel in our buildings is one of safety, connection, and security. And we work 2 things that support that. One, our student, staff, and families do a really good job of giving us early warning on many of these things so we can get to them quickly. And as Dr. Rathke said, most of these are not credible to begin with. But we work really hard to also limit exposure early so that it's not, even if there's a situation with a handful of students, we work really hard to make sure that's not rippling over into the general student body to the maximum extent possible.
So this next question is, what does a lockdown drill look like? And I'm going to break that down a little bit more. I'm wondering if you guys can touch on sort of the educational piece as well, and what you guys are doing during a lockdown drill to help support the safety end. If we can kind of talk about that in 2 parts. Yes.
So really important to just highlight that last year legislation has increased on how we do our lockdowns and what the response is. And so if you want to see updated information about our drills, you can go on our website, but that legislation is really critical. So a couple pieces that maybe families have seen that they haven't seen in the past is, 1, we are required to allow families to opt out of lockdowns. And so the very first one that we do, we send a communication to families and they have the opportunity to opt out. We have about 1 child per building who may opt out of doing that. most of the time what we find is that there might be some increased anxiety, there may be some sensory things that family chooses to want to have that child opt out. So we are, one, responsible to do that. Two, after a lockdown, that very first one, we are required, and I'm grateful, we've learned a lot, but our staff fill out a survey, and our students fill out a survey or a reflection. We do it kind of in survey form in a Google Doc so that we can see what students say, and we ask them, like, how do you feel after you experienced this lockdown? How do you think it went? And then they have some opportunity to give us some open feedback. And so we did that this year. We did report it out to the school board. Really important for us we're hearing about how our students see and feel versus how our staff see and feel. And I don't know if those of you in the audience or online who have children who are a little bit younger or experiencing school now, their experience around lockdowns and their expectation of things that are happening is very different than mine was. And the ways in which my two children talk about that is very different, and they expect it to be part of their day. That is how they have lived their school life, and they have lots of feelings and thoughts about it. So we do get an opportunity to see what our kids see, think, and feel about experiencing that. So those are some pieces that are really critical. That legislative piece has shifted, and so you have seen a different way in which we've communicated those drills. But I'm going to let Nate talk about that.
So we hold 5 drills a year as part of that legislative mandate. Only the first drill is what we call a full practice drill, and the other 4 I'll talk about in a little bit. But before the drill, we communicate in advance with families, which is an additional piece of that legislation, giving families advance notice so they have the chance to opt out and can also be prepared to talk to their students about what's upcoming. During the lockdown drill, we close the locked doors, we move students away from doors and windows, lights are out, and students are asked to be quiet. We go around and confirm, not in a scary bang on doors way, but we confirm the doors have been locked. We hit the strobe lights, which is an indicator that the lockdown drill is in effect. And then once those steps have been completed, we close up the drill. The rest of our 4 drills, a few are rostering drills, so students don't even experience those. We ask staff to check student rosters against who's actually in the building as a way of confirming who do we know who's in the building, how do we confirm that people are where they're supposed to be, the right people are where they're supposed to be, and then towards the end of the year we hold drills that are talk aloud, right? So we're not going to actually do the thing, but it's where we talk through in a lockdown drill as a refresher, here's what we do. One thing that we're able to do as a result of that survey in the fall is take student and staff feedback, right? My classmates were too noisy, or I didn't feel like I had enough time to, whatever that might be, and we're able to weave that into that spring talk aloud practice for students and staff.
Yeah, so Hunter and I's perspective when it comes to lockdown drills, so as Dr. Rathke mentioned earlier, they do the one live, I would call it live lockdown drill. Hunter and I's role in that drill is to be, in my opinion, a consultant. We walk around, we just make sure that the school is handling the drill what we deem as appropriate, and if we see anything that does not mirror what kids or staff should be doing, we do voice that to building staff, which would be principal, assistant principal, deans, whoever's in charge of the drill at that time. Because again, our role is to make sure that, heaven forbid, if a situation like that were to happen, we want our staff and students prepared. So I think us coming in as a consultant and just making sure that it's run effectively, kids and staff are doing what they're supposed to do, I think that's very effective. The other 4 drills that were mentioned by Nate and Dr. Rathke, because those are happening in the classroom, that's where it stays. We don't really do much involvement with that. We let the school follow their policies and state statute in covering those other 4. drills.
How is digital citizenship folded into the curriculum, and is there a class for students? And maybe talk about how you tackle that developmentally for elementary versus secondary.
We have an amazing digital team that we have talked a lot about this topic. We've gotten some feedback from the community about some specific topics like sextortion that has been really important to people to ensure that we are educating students. And so there has been a curriculum that has been developed. It happens in various ways depending on the level. It might happen in advisory, it might happen in a portion of a class. But we do scaffold it developmentally so that students are learning something different in first grade than they're learning in 12th grade, and their access and experiences. And so we can always get better at that, but we continue. I believe that it is critical that we are talking about digital citizenship, because the gift that Eastern Carver County has given us is a one-to-one device for each of our students, which we're grateful for, and our kids are so ahead of the game that they get to have access to that all the time, and it creates avenues for them. And so making sure that they're educated, just like a threat or a situation that happens, and we started out saying we are obligated to educate our students even when they make mistakes. I believe that one-to-one device, it is really critical that we're educating them through that as well.
So one of the things that we are undertaking right now as a district is exploring what that digital citizenship curriculum looks like, incorporating artificial intelligence and AI. As students increasingly have access, everyone has increasing access to tools where you can create an image or a video of me saying or doing things, or others, or accessing content, or generating content, or writing up an essay to a test, or simply getting help with your math homework, right? AI can be an incredible tool to accelerate our work and to make us sharper, or it can be used for harm. And so we are in the middle of generating how can we support our students, staff, and community to use AI as a tool, while also teaching students about appropriate, safe use of AI in terms of digital citizenship.
There is a link on the website that you can see information about our digital citizenship program, and we do use, and I'm going to forget that I'm pointing to it, we do try to use developmentally appropriate guidelines that are provided by some parent groups that help us develop that curriculum.
So that is the end of the questions submitted through from the audience. So I am going to close us out with a last question. We're going to start at the end with Officer Panning. How can the community and parents support the work that we're doing?
I think the number one thing you can do to support the work we're doing as far as keeping kids, our students, safe in school and out is just collaboration. I want parents to feel like they can call me. Parents should feel good about calling school staff. Teachers and students should be good about doing that. But I'm here to serve you, and I want you to be comfortable with coming to me with concerns or ideas or what have you. So I think that building relationships, getting to know one another, coming to things like this is very important as we work to collaborate and partner to raise our kids safely.
I think Hunter brought some very good points there, but just to add on that a little bit, I think as parents, I think there's a lot of resources out there to maybe help educate you on what social media is, what it's advanced to in the last 10 years, what's popular, what isn't. And like we've already discussed, I think, multiple times tonight, but I'm going to reiterate it, just having that conversation with your children of what social media is and what potential dangers are with social media. And again, if you are going to use social media for communication, make sure you are having those conversations with people that you actually know. Hunter and I can attest to this, but most of the situations that we deal with when it comes to social media issues is a lot of times it's people that they don't even know who they're talking to. So just having those conversations and just making sure that these children are using social media appropriately would go a long way.
Well, Officer Manaen and Deputy Larson shared the number one and number two things I would recommend, so I'll go a different direction. I think it's really important to us here in Eastern Carver County that we are partnering with you, our community, and so maybe an ask would be in terms of how to help. As you're in the community, as leaders, community members, families, and you hear other families or community members asking about it or raising concerns about what does safety look like in Eastern Carver County, this will be available online as just an ongoing resource to refer them to. I also encourage you to have them reach out so we can have a similar conversation. It's really important that our families and community members feel safe and aware of what we're doing to keep schools safe.
So there are a couple things. I think tonight what my hope is in partnership is that you got to see behind the curtain a little bit on what happens when a threat is made. There is a million ways that we could go talking about social media and school safety, and really what brought us here today was the increase of threats, perceived or real, to schools. And so we want our community to trust us and to be in partnership with us, but being seen behind the curtain a little bit helps that. What happens when these things happen, and how do we react, and what do we do? I think, like all of you probably, trying to figure out how to talk to our children is so critical, and so I would just offer a couple pieces. Is just kidding isn't gonna work. You cannot be just kidding. And what I have found is when I was a middle school principal and these things would happen, I would talk to students and I'd say, you know, when you get on an airplane and if you said there's a bomb on the airplane and then said, and just as the US Marshal would come towards you, you wouldn't get to say just kidding. Schools are the same way. And when you make that connection where they know, they understand that, it's like, oh yeah, you're right. School cannot be just kidding. So talking to our kids about that. And then I think the other piece I would just say is that I know for me as a mom, it's very easy for me to say something like, I'm gonna take your phone from you, you can't have it from, 8 to 7 or whatever, but how do we help our kids have healthy interactions and pieces on social media? Because there are some really amazing things about social media. Artificial intelligence, there's lots of things that are really great about access. And then how do we help our students navigate appropriately at their age level? And so continuing to talk to your students about how to do that. So those would be a couple things I would say.
Any other parting thoughts?
Well, I just really want to thank people who came in person today. We are thinking about what would a series look like of community conversations, and so I'm excited to do more with our community and our partners around things that we're experiencing as community members, as parents, as students, and so we certainly are excited that people are here tonight with us. I want to thank our team that came tonight. We do all of this work in collaboration on behalf of our students, and so I just want to thank you for facilitating tonight. This was a great opportunity for us to be out in front and just share what we're doing in our district to keep our kids and our families safe.
So with that, thank you to our audience. Thank you to our awesome panel. You've extended your work days, all of you. I appreciate you being here and sharing. Thanks to the folks that tuned in online. Have a wonderful night, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.